I'm 70. I avoid people now. Here's why. Advice from old people. I never thought 70 would come this fast. One moment, you're young, surrounded by people, caught up in life's whirlwind. Then, seemingly overnight, the world looks different. You look different. And the things that once seemed so important, they start to fade. But the most unexpected change? I've started avoiding people, not out of anger, not out of sadness, but because, after 7 decades of giving, learning, and sometimes hurting, I've come to a realization. Not every relationship is worth holding on to, not every conversation is worth having, and not every person deserves my time. At first, I wondered if something was wrong with me, but the more I reflect, the more I see, this isn't loneliness, this is freedom. And I know I'm not alone in this feeling. So why do so many of us, as we age, start retreating? Why does solitude become more appealing than constant connection? The answers might surprise you. Stay with me because today, I'll share the truths no one talks about, the real reasons I avoid people now, and why it's the best decision I've ever made. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Let's begin. 1. Time feels more precious than ever. The Roman philosopher Seneca once said, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." He warned that people waste their lives chasing things that don't matter, assuming they have time to spare. The Stoics believed that living well meant understanding the scarcity of time, not hoarding wealth, not seeking endless distractions but cherishing each fleeting moment. Similarly, in the East, the samurai saw time as sacred. The Bushido code taught them that every day could be their last, and so they moved through life with intentionality, presence, and gratitude. To waste time was to disrespect the gift of life itself. Yet, in today's world, time is spent thoughtlessly, scrolled away on screens, lost in trivial arguments, wasted on people who take more than they give. The irony? We only realize its value when it's almost gone. When you reach my age, time doesn't just pass, it weighs on you. I remember being young, feeling invincible, believing there would always be another day, another chance, another moment. But that's the lie we tell ourselves. Time is not promised, and I learned this lesson in the hardest way possible. I had a brother once, not by blood but by bond. His name was Henry, and he was the closest thing I had to family outside of my own home. We met in our 20s, built our careers side by side, shared countless late-night conversations about our dreams, our regrets, the kind of men we wanted to be. But life, as it does, got in the way. He got married, I got busy. Work consumed my days and responsibilities piled up like unpaid bills. We made plans, oh we made so many plans. Let's catch up next week, we'd say, next month, next year. But next time never came. One night I got a call from his wife. Henry had passed suddenly. A heart attack, no warnings, no goodbyes. I sat in silence, staring at the wall, replaying every time I had chosen something, anything, over just sitting down with my friend, sharing a meal, asking how he was, being present. I thought back to the last time we spoke. It had been brief, just a quick exchange of pleasantries over the phone, no depth, no real conversation, and now, that was all I had left of him. I attended his funeral and saw the faces of people who had made time for him when I had not. They shared memories, stories, laughter through their tears. I, on the other hand, sat there filled with regret, because here's the thing about time. It's not taken from us all at once. It's stolen in tiny, forgettable moments. Every postponed visit, every ignored phone call, every time we say, "I'll do it later," believing that later will always come. After that, I changed. Not all at once, but slowly, deliberately. I started saying no to obligations that drained me, to relationships that felt one-sided, to the endless noise of a world that values busyness over meaning. I stopped rushing through my days and started savoring them. I began waking up early just to watch the sunrise, letting its quiet beauty remind me that every morning is a gift. I took long walks without my phone, letting my thoughts settle like fallen leaves. I chose to invest in the people who truly mattered, the ones who made time for me as much as I made time for them. And in doing so I discovered something surprising. Life became fuller, even as my circle became smaller. Because time is not about how much you have, it's about how well you use it. We live in a world that glorifies being busy, that teaches us that our worth is measured by how much we produce, how much we own, how many people surround us. But I'll tell you this, a full schedule doesn't mean a full heart, and being surrounded by people doesn't mean you're truly connected. Real life isn't in the meetings, the obligations, the mindless scrolling. It's in the unplanned laughter, the quiet moments of reflection, the deep conversations with those who truly see you. So now I ask you, how are you spending your time? Are you giving it away to things that don't matter? Or are you using it to build memories, to nurture relationships, to experience the quiet joys of simply being alive? Think about it, because one day you'll look back, and the only thing that will matter is how much of your time was truly lived. Have you ever had a moment that made you realize the true value of time? Share your story in the comments. Let's remind each other that time isn't measured in years, it's measured in the moments that take our breath away. 2. Relationships change, and so do we. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he is not the same man." Life flows forward, never backward, and just as rivers shift their course, so do relationships. In Japanese culture, the phrase "ichigo ichi ii" means one time, one meeting, a reminder that every interaction is unique and fleeting. The samurai lived by this philosophy, understanding that every moment spent with another person is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Yet, in modern life, we hold on to relationships that no longer fit, mistaking longevity for loyalty. We forget that sometimes letting go is the most loving thing we can do. When I was young, I believed that real friendships lasted forever, that the people who walked beside me in my youth would still be there in my old age, that no matter how life changed, true connections would survive. I was wrong. I had a friend named Samuel. We met when we were 10, two boys running wild through the streets of our small town. We climbed trees, rode bikes until sunset, and shared dreams about the men we'd become. For decades we were inseparable. He was my best man at my wedding. I was there when his first child was born. When my father died, he was the one who pulled me back from the edge of grief. But life has a way of changing people. Or maybe it just reveals who we were all along. Samuel became someone I no longer recognized, not overnight, but slowly, over years. His ambition consumed him. He was always too busy, always chasing something just beyond his reach. Every time we spoke, he was distracted, as if our conversations were obligations rather than connections. At first I made excuses. He's just caught up in work, he'll come around. But he didn't. One day I called him, just to catch up, just to remind him that I was still here. He answered, his voice rushed, distant. "Hey, can I call you back later?" I said, "Sure." He never did. And for the first time in my life, I didn't chase after him. I could have. I could have sent another message, could have tried harder, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was holding on to a version of us that no longer existed. That night, I sat on my porch, thinking about all the people I had lost, not to death, but to time. Some friendships end in explosions, in betrayal and bitterness, but most? They fade quietly, like a candle burning down to its wick. It took me years to understand that this isn't failure, this isn't abandonment, it's just life. Not all friendships are meant to last forever. Some are meant to teach us something, to shape us, and then to drift away when their time is up. Yet, I see so many people today clinging to friendships that no longer serve them, out of habit, out of guilt, out of fear of being alone. They keep reaching out, keep checking in, keep trying, while the other person has already let go. But here's what I've learned. Friendship isn't about how long you've known someone, it's about who still shows up. The people who truly care about you, they don't need reminders. Now, I live differently. I no longer pour energy into relationships that feel one-sided. I no longer chase people who don't chase me back. I spend my time with those who make an effort, those who bring joy rather than obligation, and in doing so, I've discovered something I never expected: peace. Because holding on to a friendship that no longer fits is like wearing a coat 2 sizes too small. You can force it, but eventually you have to admit that it no longer belongs to you. So I ask you, have you ever had to walk away from a friendship, not out of anger but because it no longer felt right? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Who are the people who still show up in your life, and who have you learned to let go of? Share your experience in the comments below. Let's remind each other that letting go isn't losing, it's making space for what truly matters. 3. Trust becomes more complicated. The Chinese philosopher Confucius once said, "To be trusted is a greater compliment than to be loved." Trust is fragile, once broken it is rarely the same again. The Roman statesman Cicero warned, "Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets." History is full of those who learned this lesson too late. Julius Caesar, despite his brilliance, was betrayed by the very friend he trusted most. King Lear, blinded by false flattery, handed power to the wrong people and was left to die in the storm. Their mistakes remind us of a painful truth. Not everyone who stands beside you is on your side. And yet, a world without trust is a lonely one. The challenge is not just learning whom to trust, but learning to trust again after betrayal. When I was younger, I trusted easily. It was as natural as breathing. I believed in people. I believed in their words, their promises. I thought a handshake meant something. I thought loyalty was a given. And then life happened. I once had a best friend, James. We met in our 20s, young and ambitious, ready to conquer the world. We built a business together. Years of sweat, long nights, sacrifices. He was my brother in every way except blood. Then, one morning I walked into our office and found everything gone. The bank accounts, empty. The contracts, signed without me. The company we built. Now his alone, I stood in that empty space, staring at where my desk used to be, feeling like I had been erased from my own life. I tried to tell myself it was just money, but it wasn't. It was trust. It was years of believing in someone who had been silently planning my downfall. That betrayal changed me. After that, I saw the world differently. I stopped trusting, not just in business, but in everything. A family member borrowed money, swearing they'd pay it back. They never did. A friend shared my secrets when I needed them to be a vault. A love I thought would last forever crumbled under lies. So, I built walls. Tall once for years, I was polite, friendly, but distant. No one got too close. I smiled, I nodded, but in my heart I had locked the door and thrown away the key. But here's the thing about trust. It never disappears completely. One winter, my car broke down in the middle of nowhere. No phone signal, no warm place to wait. I sat in the freezing cold, thinking, this is how it ends. Just me and bad luck. Then, an old man in a battered truck pulled over. He didn't know me. He didn't owe me anything. But he spent an hour fixing my car, refusing to take a single dollar in return. He just patted my shoulder and said, "World's tough enough. No harm in helping." And in that moment something softened in me. I realized that while some people will betray you, not everyone will. Trust isn't about blind faith, it's about balance. Yes, there are those who will take advantage. Yes, we must protect our hearts. But if we close ourselves off completely, we miss out on the goodness that still exists. So now, I trust differently. Not freely, but not completely guarded either. I watch actions, not just words. I listen to instincts, not just promises. And, when someone proves they are worthy of trust, I let them in because, in the end, trust is not about never being hurt. It's about deciding who is worth the risk. What about you? Have you ever struggled with trusting again after betrayal? How did you find your way back? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experiences might help someone else heal. 4. The world feels different now. The Greek philosopher Plato once warned, when the mode of music changes, the walls of the city shake. He wasn't just talking about melodies, he was speaking of the way society shifts when its values and traditions are abandoned. The Roman Empire didn't collapse because of war, it decayed from within, as people lost their sense of duty, their connection to each other, and their willingness to uphold their own civilization. The Stoics too believed that a person should never let external distractions dictate their inner peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He knew that when the world becomes too loud, too chaotic, the only way to survive is to turn inward, to seek wisdom, not noise, and presence, not distraction. Yet, in today's world, distraction reigns. People rush from one thing to another, never truly present, never fully engaged. They talk, but do they truly listen? They scroll, but do they truly connect? And in chasing everything, they seem to have lost something essential. I grew up in a world that felt smaller but richer. Neighbors weren't just the people who lived next door, they were family. If someone was sick, we showed up with soup. If a child misbehaved, any adult had the right to set them straight. We belonged to each other, not just to ourselves. Now I walk down my own street, past houses filled with people I barely know. Doors stay closed, conversations are rare. It's as if the world has become a crowd of lonely people, standing shoulder to shoulder yet miles apart. I remember when Sundays were sacred. Families gathered around dinner tables, not television screens. We talked, we laughed, we listened. But now I sit at family gatherings and watch my own grandchildren staring at their phones, thumbs tapping, more connected to people miles away than to the ones sitting right in front of them. I try to remind them, put the phones down, talk to each other. They smile, they nod, and then they go right back to scrolling. I know I sound like an old man stuck in the past, but let me ask you, when did life start feeling so disconnected? I remember when stores closed early and families spent evenings together, when conversations weren't interrupted by a notification, when people looked up when they walked, not down at a glowing rectangle. It's not just technology, it's the pace of life. Everything moves too fast now. People rush from one thing to another, barely stopping to breathe. Conversations feel shallow, as if no one has time to truly listen. And the noise, my God, the noise. Televisions blaring, phones ringing, social media feeding people a constant stream of opinions, anger and fear. Everyone talking but no one really saying anything. So I've stopped chasing a world that refuses to slow down. Instead, I create my own quiet. I take long walks without my phone. I sit outside and just listen, to the birds, to the wind, to the world beyond a screen. I choose real conversations, even if they are fewer, because I would rather have one deep talk than 100 empty ones. And you know what? I don't feel like I'm missing out. I feel like I'm finally living again, because life isn't found in the distractions, the updates, the endless noise. It's in the quiet moments we no longer notice. The world may have changed, but I don't have to change with it. So tell me, does the world feel different to you too? Have you noticed how disconnected we've become, even in the age of connection? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's remind each other that real connection isn't measured in likes, but in moments that truly matter. 5. Solitude isn't loneliness. The Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi once said, "A man of understanding delights in the river, while a man of virtue finds joy in the mountains." His words remind us that peace is not found in endless activity, but in stillness, in the quiet embrace of solitude. The Stoics believed this as well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He understood that the external world is noisy, full of distractions, but true clarity comes from within. Throughout history, the greatest thinkers, artists, and sages have sought solitude, not as an escape, but as a way to listen to the world without the noise of others clouding their thoughts. Yet, in today's world, solitude is often mistaken for loneliness. Society tells us that to be alone is to be forgotten. But the truth is, learning to be alone is one of the greatest strengths a person can have. For most of my life, I feared being alone. When I was young, I filled every moment with noise, friends, parties, obligations. I thought that to be alone was to be forgotten, that solitude was something to be avoided at all costs. I surrounded myself with people, believing that the more connections I had, the richer my life would be. But I've learned that you can be in a room full of people and still feel completely alone. The day I truly understood the difference between loneliness and solitude was not a grand event. No dramatic betrayal, no tragedy, just a simple morning, years ago. I woke up in an empty house. No phone calls, no obligations, no one needing me. For a moment I panicked. The silence felt heavy, unfamiliar. Was this what loneliness felt like? I reached for my phone out of habit, but then something stopped me. Instead, I made a cup of coffee and sat by the window. Outside, the world was alive, the birds flitting between branches, the soft hum of the breeze, the slow dance of sunlight filtering through the trees. And for the first time in years, I just sat there. No rushing, no distractions, just me, my thoughts, and the quiet beauty of the moment. That was the day I realized that solitude wasn't something to fear, it was something to cherish. You see, the world teaches us that our worth is measured by how social we are, by how many friends we have, by how full our calendars look. But as I've aged, I've learned that being busy doesn't mean being fulfilled, and being surrounded by people doesn't mean being understood. In fact, the loneliest I've ever felt was when I was trying too hard to belong. I remember attending social gatherings where everyone was talking, but no one was listening. I remember friendships where I gave and gave, yet was left feeling drained. I remember conversations that felt like background noise instead of true connection. One day, I asked myself, why am I holding on to relationships that make me feel lonelier than solitude ever could? So I started making changes. I stopped saying yes to every invitation. I stopped forcing conversations that felt empty. I stopped keeping relationships alive out of obligation. And something surprising happened. The more I embraced solitude, the more meaningful my connections became. Now, when I do spend time with people, I am present, fully there, truly engaged, not just making small talk, but having real conversations that matter. I've stopped filling the silence with people who drain me. Instead, I fill it with books, with nature, with moments of quiet reflection. And you know what I've found? Peace. Not the kind that comes from external validation, but the kind that comes from knowing yourself so well that you no longer need distractions to feel whole. I think about the younger generation today, how they are constantly connected, yet so many of them feel lost. They fill every empty moment with a screen, afraid of boredom, afraid of stillness. They don't realize that the answers they are looking for can't be found in endless scrolling. They can only be found in silence. Now, I sit outside in the mornings just listening to the world wake up. I take long walks, letting my thoughts wander. I spend time alone, and I do so without feeling lonely. Because I have finally learned that solitude isn't emptiness, it's a chance to truly know yourself. So I ask you, have you ever experienced the kind of solitude that brings clarity rather than loneliness? Have you learned to enjoy your own company, to embrace stillness rather than fear it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's remind each other that being alone isn't a weakness, it's a strength. 6. Why I avoid people now. The Greek philosopher Epictetus once said, "Keep company only with those who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best." He understood that the people we surround ourselves with shape our peace of mind. The Buddha taught, holding on to toxic relationships is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. Even in ancient times, wise people knew that not everyone deserves a place in your life. Choosing solitude over toxic connections is not bitterness, it's self-respect. And yet, even today, we are taught to feel guilty for walking away from those who drain us. But what happens when giving too much leaves us empty? What happens when we spend a lifetime being there for others, only to find that no one is there for us? For most of my life, I was a giver. I was the person who answered every phone call, the one who stayed late to help, the friend who always said, "Don't worry, I've got it." I believed that being needed meant being loved, that saying yes to everything made me a good person. And then, one day, I woke up exhausted. Not just tired, drained. I looked at my life and realized something painful. I had spent years giving to people who never once gave back. There was the friend who only called when she needed a favor, the family member who expected my help but never asked how I was doing, the people who took and took but never stopped to ask if I had anything left to give. For years, I ignored the exhaustion. I told myself, this is what it means to care. This is what being a good person looks like. But then came the moment that changed everything. It was my birthday, a milestone year, and I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at a phone that didn't ring. The people I had dropped everything for, time and time again, they weren't there. Not a call, not a message. I had poured my energy into people who never once thought to do the same for me. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer give my time, my energy, my heart to people who didn't value it. And let me tell you something, walking away from the wrong people makes room for the right ones. I stopped saying yes out of obligation. I started setting boundaries. I chose quality over quantity, a few meaningful relationships instead of a sea of empty ones. And something unexpected happened. The more I let go, the more at peace I felt. I no longer felt guilty for avoiding people who brought drama, negativity, or selfishness into my life. I no longer chased friendships that felt one-sided. I no longer made excuses for those who only remembered me when they needed something. I learned that peace is not something you find, it's something you protect. And as the years passed, I noticed something else. I was no longer alone, not in the way I had feared. Because in letting go of those who drained me, I made space for those who truly cared. The friend who checked in just to say hello. The family member who asked, "How are you?" and really listened. The stranger who became a lifelong companion simply because we saw each other for who we truly were. The world tells us that the more people we have in our lives, the better. But I'll tell you the truth, I would rather have one person who truly cares than 100 who don't. Now I live differently. I no longer feel the need to explain why I keep my circle small. I no longer feel guilty for protecting my time. I no longer mistake being needed for being loved. Because love, real love, doesn't ask you to exhaust yourself. So I ask you, have you ever felt this way? Have you ever had to let go of people for the sake of your own peace? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's remind each other that choosing peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. If you've been feeling this shift, pulling away from the noise, choosing solitude over obligation, and prioritizing your own peace, I want you to know you're not alone. Aging isn't about fading into the background. It's about stepping into a life that feels more authentic, more peaceful, and more intentional. It's about embracing what truly matters, whether that's a quiet morning with a cup of coffee, the laughter of your grandchildren, or the simple joy of being present in the moment. This chapter isn't an ending, it's a new beginning. A time to live life on your own terms, free from the weight of unnecessary expectations. A time to nurture the connections that bring you joy and to walk away from those that don't. So, if you've ever felt guilty for choosing solitude, let that guilt go. You've earned the right to prioritize your well-being, to slow down, and to savor life at your own pace. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you felt this shift in your own life? Let me know in the comments. And if this video resonated with you, give it a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for being here, take care, and remember, peace is not found in the number of people around you, but in the quality of the life you choose to live.